the way in which the Lord of all uses secondary causes comes through very clearly in this passage from the book of Ezra. We remember that Cyrus, king of Persia, was not a monotheist, but he was the one that the Lord used. And his providence also worked directly by inspiring people to provide what was needed. He put on people's hearts the notion of sending exactly what was needed for the rebuilding of the temple. The more one is involved with the work of the Lord, the more one sees that pattern of things emerging. One is reminded of that promise in the Sermon on the Mount, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you." And it also frees us to some extent from the stress element, the anxiety element that can be linked with serving the Lord. Because what the Lord wants is our attention and our heart. And he's trying to warn us that we're not God. And to play God is to miss the appointment. And so he's big enough to handle your history. Someone said, history is his story. And one does see how actually what was shown to our mystic Julian of Norwich, all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, is true, that there is a guiding hand. We have an old saying, do we not? God writes straight with crooked lines. He makes use even of our blunders. I once heard it put by our abbot in France that what happens is this: the Lord does not abandon us on the way, and if we make a blunder, then his grace comes back to us at our blunder and takes us from there. If you have ever driven in a car trying to be guided by a sat-nav, well, if you're Irish, the chances are that you've only got one ear open to the sat-nav. The attention is going to the conversation in the car. So the sat-nav is trying to prod you, and it's getting down to a countdown. After 2 kilometers, you have a left turn. After 1 kilometer, you have a left turn. In 500 meters, you have a left turn. And then you hear recalculating. And it's trying to tell you, you idiot. Well, what happens then is that the Lord does the same. He has to recalculate from where we are. And so he's not abandoning us. And that was told me in precisely the mistakes that one might make in a vocational trajectory. The Lord comes to that point where you're at. Lord, what wilt thou have me to do? Well, one can't make that prayer of St. Paul on the ground in any other point of time but the present. You can't say, where should I have made that prayer? It doesn't work like that. God, in his grace, is here. The grace is in the present moment, and it's all the doctrine of Père de Caussade, the sacrament of the present moment. His teaching is that the present moment contains in itself all that is sufficient for our sanctification there. But it's all we have, and we must grasp it. St. Augustine insisted, I fear the Lord passing, timeo Dominum, transiuntem. We grasp him there. I once heard it put very well in a Mariapolis meeting in Bangor, Focolare movement. One good lady had a very graphic way of putting it. It's rather like a conveyor belt. And our task is quite clear, that we've been asked to observe all these candles coming through the conveyor belt and to light each one as it's passing us. The temptation would be to be conscientious, and if we fumble with one and let it go, to try and catch up with it. So we might eventually catch up with it, but in the meantime one's lost 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7. So it's the one before us that has to be ignited, and when it's there, remember that. Live right now. it also applies to what we might have in the way of self-defense against tragedy and disaster, what we call worry. It's the unhealthy worry which is over the top. It has to be there in the form of preparation, prevision, forethought. If it's not there, into the mode of a drunken or a gambler who couldn't care less, or even worse, the drug addict who really couldn't care less. And you know what that leads to? It's the present moment and only. But we have the present moment in a situation of responsibility, remembering that there are others to follow. So the present moment is given to us also to prepare the others, but not live them. It applies also to regret. If one spends the present moment regretting, or if one spends it planning. Remember that saying of John Lennon, life is what happens when you're preparing what to do next. So there's also the question of wasting, in a sense, the grace of the present moment in heavy preparation, which is too filling with regard to the thought value. One person dying said, I might as well not have done so much worrying. All the worrying I didn't do me an awful lot of good, for 90% of the things I worried about didn't happen ever anyway. And one Buddhist monk had it in 10 commandments which he put together, and one of them ran like this: thou shalt not worry, for in so doing thou shalt undergo the same disaster twice over. So, bear that in mind also, because part of our worry is that we insist that history be written thus and not thus. I will not be happy unless this happens. Well, that already is playing God, and also condemning ourselves probably to being unhappy, because we've created there an absolute which wasn't there in creation. The absolute is my will, and the absolute is that it will be thus. It has to be thus. Why? Because I need it to be thus. Well, that's the bit that can go. In fact, looking again towards the Eastern Bloc, there is that notion which has come from Buddhism, which is actually, in that point, not erroneous. But the great enemy of the soul is desire. It comes through in Catholic mysticism too, in the teaching of holy indifference. One finds it in the spiritual authors coming through all the time. La sainte indifférence, holy indifference. That the soul who is free has not got those needs. In other words, all it wants is the divine will, and that gives it peace, because then what's happening will be enough. Lord, I have no preference, all I want is your will. So if your will manifests itself in this form, that is enough for me. With regard to direct interventions, then we have also that, especially in his own work. I happened to come across this event in the life of St. John Bosco. It was something that happened in his ministry. He was, as you know, keen on making sure that all the boys in his care were in a state of grace. In those days, of course, they wouldn't go to communion unless they'd been to confession, and that was the case. So one day there was going to be a school assembly with Holy Mass offered. He was going to be the celebrant, and all the boys were going to be present. That meant over 600 communions, because they would all go, they were all prepared by him. So the sacristan knew that was going to happen, and prepared a ciborium with that number of particles. But something happened at the last moment and he got distracted. And so the good saint presumed that everything was in place, or that there was enough already in the tabernacle when he didn't see a second ciborium. And so he celebrated calmly and opened the tabernacle when the boys started coming to the altar rails, and was quite alarmed, although he was very controlled in his reaction when he found that there were only a few hosts in the only ciborium in the tabernacle. He nevertheless made as if nothing had happened and started to give Holy Communion to the first row of boys who came to the altar rails. Then another roll came. And on it went until all 600 boys had received what? Hosts. This happens actually even with ordinary bread. I have a friend who is now a nun. It happened to her more than once. She was working with the poor and she'd been given clear instructions because there were so many men coming that day to give them only a limited portion. But when she saw what that meant, she started to obey the command given, and only that much for a strong man. And out of pure compassion, he just couldn't go through with that order. And so she gambled on the Lord. Lord, take care of this. I just can't, in conscience, give that tiny amount to this strong man. So he went happy away, and the rest came too. A large number, a very large number. And then she realized what was going on. There was always the same amount in the limited stock, which was only small, and they were all getting the same amount. And she got to the last man, and then only it stopped. Even on a daily basis, I see that happening, and I've heard it happening also in convents. There was a Poor Clare convent I used to visit a lot and help in Italy, adoration day and night, non-stop. A big convent, and they lived purely on providence, and you'd see it arrive, and they were always given what was needed at the right time. And in my own case, I never have to buy food. It just arrives, and always at the right time. And it's a perpetual miracle. The Lord is taking care as long as you're looking at Him and at the tabernacle. Don't focus on that, He'll take care of it. But He wants you to do the other bit. Otherwise things might not happen. As regards doing the Lord's work, the combination of providence through events and the work of God directly in the heart can be seen. Listen to this one. You have heard of the patron saint of students who have exams. It's St. Joseph of Cupertino. And there are reasons for that. There was no way humanly he could have been ordained. But the Lord, by direct intervention, made it happen that he got through his exams. But that's another story how it happened. More than once. But anyway, he would have this gift of liftoff. And we have it taking place again here. There was a prince, no less, a Lutheran prince, Duke of Brunswick, Hans Frederick. While visiting the principal courts of Europe in the year 1649, the prince, then 25 years of age, came from Rome to Assisi, expressly to see this holy friar. Because his fame had reached Germany even. On his arrival at the monastery, he, along with two of his retainers, was given lodging and was led next morning to the door of the chapel, where the servant of God was offering the holy sacrifice. The saint, who was not informed of their presence, was made aware of it when about to break the sacred host, which he found so hard that in spite of all his efforts, he could not break it, but had to replace it on the pattern. For a man of God, that would be quite upsetting. He has to break it. Fixing his eyes upon the host, he wept, and with a loud cry, here we are, rose in kneeling posture, about 5 paces into the air. With another cry, he returned, after some time, to the altar and broke the sacred host, though with great effort. At the insistence of the Duke, the Father Superior asked him why he had wept. And he replied, "My dear compatriot, the persons whom you sent to my Mass this morning have a hard heart, for they do not believe all that Holy Mother Church teaches, and therefore the Lamb of God was hardened in my hands, so that I could not break the sacred host." The Duke, astonished at this occurrence, deferred his departure in order to consult with the servant of God. This he did after dinner, remaining with the saint till Compline. The following year he came to Assisi, and, as he had promised, knelt before the Blessed Sacrament, and in the presence of Cardinals Facchinetti and Rapaccioli made profession of faith in the hands of Father Joseph. In my own case it was slightly gentler, because I just somehow knew that in the tabernacle there was something there, in that open church not far from where we lived at home, the only church that was ever open in our area, and it was a magnet. And assisting at the High Mass there somehow got through to me, this is not what you're used to, but it's something else. And any person in a state of grace, no matter what he believes, if he's truly open, will feel the same thing. So, if it's not happening as much as it might do, it's because we're getting in the way. We think we're being attractive, theatrical, and advertising well for the Lord by doing all kinds of interesting things. But actually, we're playing God. And all Jesus wants is space. He's powerful enough to do it himself if we don't create a barrage.